Judge laughs at homeless man in court, then his identity stuns everyone. Even though it was another day of regular hearings and minor offenses in the little town of Crestwood, the courthouse was crowded with people for the morning session. Judge Harold Whitmore, a harsh individual who had a reputation for being impatient, let out a sigh as the subsequent defendant made his way into the courtroom. The guy was very untidy. His clothing was tattered and unclean, and his face was concealed by a thick beard that was not well groomed. When he walked by, the bailiffs wrinkled their noses in frustration because he smelled like the streets. People in the gallery murmured, and some of them laughed under their breath. "State your name," Judge Whitmore commanded, scarcely pulling his gaze away from the paperwork he was processing. The guy who was homeless coughed, his voice becoming raspy. Daniel Carter, with a smile on his face, the judge gave the prosecutor a look that conveyed his amusement. "Trespassing and public drunkenness are the charges that have been brought against you, Mr. Carter. What are your pleadings?" Following a moment of hesitation, Daniel straightened his stance. "Your Honor, before I answer, there's something you should know," Whitmore snorted with disdain. "Unless you're about to tell me you're secretly the mayor, I suggest you, I'm a federal judge." It was completely silence in the room. During that brief period, nobody moved. After that, the prosecutor erupted in laughing, at which point a couple of the jurors joined in. It was even Whitmore who laughed. "All right. As for me, I am the president. Moving on, shall we?" On the other hand, Daniel did not flinch. As he slowly delved under his ragged coat, he extracted a little insignia that had been worn down by the elements. It was slipped over the bench by him. When Whitmore took it up, his grin began to go away. His complexion became drab. "Judge Daniel Carter, please. What is the United States District Court?" There was a tremor in his voice. The laughing of the prosecutor was stifled in his vocal cords. Many people in the gallery let out gasps. Whitmore was the intended target of Daniel's penetrating stare. "My investigation into the possibility of corruption in this courts began 3 months ago when I went undercover. So, let's just suppose that I have had enough of it." The room went to pieces. Reporters frantically searched for their mobile devices. Bailiffs were frozen, uncertain of what action to take. The hands of Whitmore trembled. "This is a mistake. I'm sorry. You really can't just but I can," Daniel answered in a composed manner. He shifted his attention to the crowd, which was astonished. "And for the record, everyone who laughed at a homeless man today should be ashamed. The FBI conducted a raid on the courtroom within a few hours. A number of individuals, including Whitmore, were taken into custody for bribery and wrongdoing. As for the judge, what about him?" In the same manner that he had entered, he went out with his head held high, leaving the whole town in a state of disbelief. The controversy shook Crestwood to its very foundations. "Undercover judge exposes corruption, local officials arrested," was the headline that blared from the dashboard of the news vehicles that crowded the courtroom. But the tale did not come to an end there. The expression on Judge Whitmore's face was one of pure amazement as he was being taken away by FBI officers in handcuffs. "You have completely ruined me." He spat at Daniel Carter. Simply adjusting his tie, Daniel, who had recently shaved his head and was dressed in a fine suit, did so. No, Harold. You have damaged your own life." In the meanwhile, the prosecutor, who had laughed so brazenly at the homeless man, was suspended awaiting inquiry, since it was discovered that he had been accepting payments to remove cases from the court system. As a result of witnesses coming forward with information concerning questionable judgments in previous cases, even a few jurors were questioned. Everyone in the town was in a frenzy. Those individuals who had previously made fun of Daniel in court avoided making eye contact, their cheeks ablaze with embarrassment. Later on that day, Judge Carter disclosed the whole details of the situation at a news conference. It was said that this area has been plagued by allegations of corruption for many years, with cases being dropped for no apparent reason, affluent defendants being allowed to go free, and the poor being given the boot. However, no one was able to confirm it. Thus, he decided to take things into his own hands. Over the course of 3 months, he lived on the streets, fitting in with the homeless community that Crestwood encompasses. Through his own personal experience, he was able to see directly how the system failed those who were most vulnerable, including how police officers harassed them and how judges like Whitmore ignored injustice. "I needed to see the truth for myself," he said in response. "And what I found was worse than I imagined. At the same moment when everyone believed that the tale had reached its conclusion, a reporter yelled out, 'Judge Carter, why did you choose this case to reveal yourself?' There was a change in Daniel's face. Because the individual who was detained with me that evening and who was charged with public drunkenness was a homeless veteran by the name of Marcus Riley. He was not intoxicated. A diabetic emergency was occurring at that moment. Furthermore, rather of assisting him, the cops took him into custody. There was complete silence in the room. Marcus died in custody the next morning. One of the people in the throng let out a gasp. That's when I knew I had to act. The justice has been done, but at what price? There was a significant upheaval. Initially, the police department initiated an inquiry inside the department. Following charges of a cover-up, the mayor tendered his resignation. In addition, Marcus Riley's family filed a lawsuit for wrongful death, which would ultimately result in significant changes to the way Crestwood dealt with its homeless population. Who is Judge Carter exactly? Although he was returning to the federal bench, he did not do so without first giving one last message. There is no authority involved in the law. People are the focus here. And if those who have taken an oath to uphold it forget that, then they do not deserve to wear the robe for themselves. Years later, Crestwood would be recognized not for its corrupt practices, but rather for its Homeless Protection Initiative, which was a program that offered individuals in need refuge, medical treatment, and legal assistance. Additionally, on the anniversary of Marcus Riley's passing, Judge Carter was often seen delivering meals to the local shelter on the day that we commemorated his passing. I am continuing to remind everyone, 5 years had gone since the devastating undercover investigation that Judge Daniel Carter had conducted in Crestwood, which had finally brought down the corrupt judicial system. The prestige of the city had been restored, homeless shelters were flourishing, and improvements in the police force were hailed throughout the country. A symbol of justice in a shattered world, Judge Carter became a folk hero throughout the course of his career. However, someone had been lurking in the shadows the whole time. Judge Carter made a second trip to Crestwood on the anniversary of Marcus Riley's passing in order to deliver a speech at the dedication ceremony for a new community center that was built in honor of the deceased veteran. Upon his arrival to the stage, he was presented with an envelope that was placed in his hand. Included herein is a single sentence: "You put us in danger. You are now in the spotlight." Underneath it was a fading photograph of a guy whom Carter immediately recognized, Vincent Moretti, the brutal crime leader whose empire had fallen as a result of Carter's inquiry. After his arrest, Moretti had disappeared, and his trial was never brought to a conclusion. In addition, it seemed that he had returned. Carter was walking to his hotel that evening when he was suddenly confronted by a black SUV that came to a stop next to him. A guy wearing a mask sprang out, but before the knife could hit, a homeless man whom Carter had assisted in the past when he was living on the streets made a tackle on the attacker. The guy shouted out, "Run, Judge!" as the SUV drove away from the scene. At that moment, Carter realized that this was more than simply a matter of vengeance. It was just a game. Through the process of searching through old case files, Carter came upon a shocking revelation. Moretti had not acted alone. For many years, he had been able to dodge prosecution with the assistance of a covert network consisting of law enforcement officers, attorneys, and even judges. And despite the fact that several people had been taken into custody, the mastermind, the true puppet master, was still at large. Someone who is in a high position. Someone who is unreachable. While Carter was at a loss for what to do next, an unexpected communication came. It was from Harold Whitmore, a former judge who had been humiliated and is now serving a term of 20 years. "Come and meet me. I am aware of the person you want to find." Whitmore grinned when he was in a visiting chamber of the jail. "You believe that you have won?" Moretti was being used as a pawn. "You are far closer to the guy you want than you may imagine." After that, he hushed a name that caused Carter's blood to turn in a chilling manner. Carter made a sudden appearance in the office of Chief Justice Warren Ellison the next morning. Ellison was the one who had appointed Carter to the federal court many years before. The only thing that Ellison did was glance up from his desk. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," a grenade of truth detonated in front of everyone. It was Ellison who was responsible for the corruption, and Moretti was the one who carried it out. The covert operation had been allowed to continue by Ellison, who had sacrificed Whitmore and other individuals in order to protect himself when Carter drew too near. "You played hero," Ellison snarled at the player. But in this game, the house always wins. Ellison's guys were federal agents broke in before Carter could respond to their presence. "Judge Carter, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice." Carter flashed a grin as the shackles were being placed around his wrists. "You should have checked your pockets, Warren." Ellison made a frowning face and then removed Carter's wireless recorder, which had been concealed in that location throughout their dispute. The Chief Justice's confession was shown live on television and repeated over and over again. Prior to midday, Ellison was taken into custody. After being discovered hiding in a safe house, Moretti was immediately extradited to stand trial. "Is that Carter?" He was standing on the steps of the courtroom as reporters yelled questions at him. "A question was posed to you. Will you ever go undercover again?" A smile appeared on the face of the homeless guy who had saved Carter's life the previous evening. Carter cast a peek in his direction. "Justice doesn't need a disguise," he said to reporters. "It just needs the truth." In response to the dismantling of Ellison's empire, the United States Senate approved the Carter Act, which mandated that every federal courtroom in the United States undergo periodic undercover examinations. A bronze monument was constructed in Crestwood, but it was not of Judge Carter. Rather, it was of Marcus Riley, the veteran whose death had been the catalyst for all that had happened. A single line that has been etched at its base. "The measure of justice is how it treats the unseen. IT is over." Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more inspiring content.